Peoples of the worldwide federated internet. What's good? So as you know, I haven't been recording regularly like I used to, going through the book of Habakkuk. I think after I'm done with Habakkuk, I might turn to my regularly scheduled program, recording more often. I kind of like it. I realize that I actually enjoy podcasting, and plus, when I don't record for a couple days, it kind of takes me off sync. I do some kind of practice runs sometimes going through the podcast, just figuring out exactly how I'm going to lay out my ideas. And it was a much easier to do this when I was doing it more often, because I was in such a rhythm that I can pretty much just turn on a camera and share my study. And it was really easy. And I'm finding that the more infrequent this is, it actually is a little harder. So I may get back to regularly recording and posting. We'll see. Anyway, we're returning to the book of Habakkuk, chapter 3. And I think we left off last time at verse 6. So we're going to pick up on verse 7. Let's get into this. All right. So Habakkuk said, I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction, and the curtains of the land of Midian did tremble. Now, if you remember anything from the last podcast, in this prayer, Habakkuk is going through the travels of the children of Israel. So he explained, he made the comment, God came out of Teman and from Piran, and we know that it's assumed that Teman means from the south. And when you look at Piran, it was south. It was the southernmost part, or one of the southernmost parts of Israel. And following that line of thinking, if you look at the travels of the children of Israel, that is the direction they took coming out of the land of Egypt. So in its context, in this prayer, Habakkuk is going over the travels of the children of Israel. And I believe that continues right here. So this land of Cushan, I looked, double checked, couldn't find what I felt like was solid answers. And as far as I can tell, this is the land right across the Gulf of Aqaba. When you come out of Egypt, across the Gulf of Aqaba going into Saudi, where Mount Sinai actually is. There was one point in history where Mount Sinai was thought to be actually in Egypt, and is actually across the Gulf of Aqaba on the Saudi Arabian side. So this is where this land of Cushan is. So again, still covering the journeys of the children of Israel. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. In my mind, I think to myself, why is this in Habakkuk's prayer? Like, what is this significance? Nothing in the Bible is mentioned haphazardly, right? There's things that you see and it might seem like, oh, why does this matter? Like, this must really have no place being here or serve no great purpose. In my opinion, everything in the Bible serves a great purpose. I have not yet figured that out, and I don't want to assume and just inject some idea that is not true. So I'm not going to make any wild claims about why exactly Habakkuk's prayer goes in this direction. But suffice it to say, this is the direction it's going in. So the name Cushan means their blackness. Again, what the significance of that is, can't really say. And Midian means strife. The only thing I will say, there's a possibility that when you look at the travels of the children of Israel from Egypt into the promised land and everything that happened, you can almost prophetically overlay the journey of the children of Israel and the journey of humanity in human history all the way from the creation all the way up into the book of the Revelation. And it's almost like the children of Israel's journey paints a picture of history. Just kind of not really a well-formed thought, kind of a wild guess. And actually, so looking at what happens, what's being discussed in verse 7, we can actually see part of this journey and kind of solidify that, yeah, Habakkuk's prayer is kind of going over the journey of the children of Israel. And we see this theme if you go to Numbers, let me see, Numbers 22:4. Hopefully I wrote down the right reference. Done that a couple times, write down the reference. It is wrong. Yeah, here it goes. All right, so, and Moab said unto the elders of Midian, now shall this company lick up all that are round about us, as the ox licketh up the grass of the field. And Balak the son of Zippor was king of the Moabites at that time. So again, like I said, covering the journeys of the children of Israel. Why this is done in this prayer and in this way, I don't know exactly. I haven't gotten that far. Also, Numbers 31, 1-3. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, avenge the children of Israel of the Midianites. Afterward shalt thou be gathered unto thy people. And Moses spake unto the people, saying, arm some of yourselves unto the war, and let them go against the Midianites, and avenge the Lord of Midian. So again, Habakkuk in his prayer, going through the journeys of the children of Israel from Egypt through the lands, covering what happened as they went through those lands and the different lands they went through. Why, again, he's doing this way, I have not figured that out yet. All right, verse 8. Was the Lord displeased against the rivers? Was thine anger against the rivers? Was thy wrath against the sea? That thou didst ride upon thine horses and thy chariots of salvation? Now again, I think this is a reference to two things. I think this is a reference to God parting the Red Sea in Exodus chapter 14, verse 18-21. And I think it's also a reference to the children of Israel walking across the Jordan River on dry land in the book of Joshua, chapter 3, verse 15-17. Now, I'm sure there's someone out there that has figured out why this prayer has gone in this direction. And maybe when I get to the very end of this book, after giving some more consideration, I will figure that out. But I've not figured that out just yet. Verse 9. Thy bow was made quite naked, according to the oaths of the tribes, even thy word, Selah. Thou didst cleave the earth with rivers. Now, I put a question mark near that verse in my notes because I was like, I'm not exactly sure I understand what's going on with that right there. So I didn't want to, again, like I said, I don't like going too deep when I don't understand something, because that's when you kind of steeple into that territory of just saying something for the sake of saying something. And normally you wind up being wrong. And when you start doing that, when you start saying stuff or thinking things just for the sake of thinking it, and you're wrong, you build false doctrine on top of false doctrine. And I try to stay away from doing that if I can. All right, so verse, where is that? Verse 10. The mountains saw thee, and they trembled. The overflowing of the water passed by. The deep uttered his voice and lifted up his hands on high. Again, making reference to these things. Okay, so even though I'm not sure about verse 9, verse 10 again seems to focus on the signs God worked during the Exodus. The mountains saw thee, and they trembled. You remember when the children of Israel came before the foot of Mount Sinai, they heard the thundering and the voice. Right? So if you were there at that time, this is how you would describe these things. Like, yo, the mountains trembled before God. Let's see, what else did I say? Okay, yeah, and the deep uttered his voice and lifted up his hands on high. Verse 11, the sun and the moon stood still in their habitations at the light of thine arrows. They went, and at the shining of thy glittering spear. Now, this is a reference to something that happened in the book of Joshua. I'm going to go there. As soon as I get my place, where is I at? Okay. So in the book of Joshua, chapter 10 and verse 12 and 13. This is actually pretty incredible. Then spake Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel, and said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou moon in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and hasted not to go down about a whole day. The sun and the moon stand still at the behest of Joshua. Now, I believe that this man trusted God so much that he went before God and he said, God, I'm going to request this. This is something that we need for this battle. And he trusted God so much that he was sure God would deliver them and answer this prayer. That's some faith right there. But the sun and the moon stopping in their tracks. And I believe that is exactly what Habakkuk is talking about in the book of Habakkuk, chapter 11, or chapter 3, my bad, verse 11, and we'll read that again. The sun and moon stood still in their habitation at the light of thine arrows. They went, and at the shining of thy glittering spear. Now, maybe this is Habakkuk before God, acknowledging that God said something that is going to happen in the future. And even though it seems somewhat like, wow, this is crazy. Is this really going to happen? That Habakkuk is acknowledging, yo, I'm looking back in the past and I'm remembering what you did with and through the children of Israel coming out of the land of Egypt. I'm remembering these miracles. I'm remembering what they saw. I'm remembering what I've read in my childhood being recorded. And I trust and believe you. Now think about this. Habakkuk didn't see these things happen. This is years down the road. But he's read these things. These things have been passed down through oral tradition, and he trusted and believed what was said. He trusted in God's word. He trusted what he read and what he heard being read out of the first 5 books. Verse 12. Thou didst march through the land in indignation. Thou didst thresh the heathen in anger. That word thresh means to thrash, and thrash means to beat out grain from the husk, to beat corn off from the cob, or spike, to beat suddenly with a stick or whip. If you look, this is a reference to what God did in those lands when the children of Israel escaped from Egypt and went on into the promised land. And you can find this covered in the book of Acts, chapter 13, verses 16 through 19. And it kind of, goes over this very thing Habakkuk is talking about. Then Paul stood up, beckoning with his hand, and said, Men of Israel, and ye that fear God, give audience. The God of this people of Israel chose our fathers and exalted the people when they dwelt as strangers in the land of Egypt, and with an high arm brought he them out of it. And about the time of 40 years suffered he their manners in the wilderness. And when he had destroyed 7 nations in the land of Canaan, he divided their land to them by lot. And this is what Habakkuk is making reference to. God brought the children of Israel into this land and drove out the people that were there and established the promised land to them, set it up by lots, by tribes. He gave them, certain sectors. And this is what Habakkuk is talking about. Now, again, I've been thinking on this for a couple days and trying to figure out, why is Habakkuk going over this? Why in his prayer is he acknowledging these things? And the best I can come up with, the thing that I say is, Habakkuk is reminding both himself and the people, don't sleep on God. Don't forget these miracles that was done back here. Right? If somebody would have told us those things were going to happen in advance, people probably wouldn't have believed it. So you might not believe that God is going to use the Chaldeans and is going to judge this people. You might not believe that lands are going to be desolate. And you might not believe that the Chaldeans themselves are going to be destroyed as a result of their own hubris. But trust and believe that God has done things just like this in the past. Do you think any of those people in the Canaan land thought that this unwarrior-like people, the children of Israel, who just came up out of slavery, it's not like they were built for this, would come into this land and totally drive out all of these warrior nations? Because for all intents and purposes, that's what these nations were. And it almost seems outlandish that Israel would come in and drive these people out. Yet that is exactly what's happened. Y'all know what it is. Stay frosty, people.